The following material was recorded at the third annual Mining Law Summit held at the James E. Rogers College of Law, and it was entitled Mine Safety, Sharing Solutions, and the idea of the summit was to investigate the concepts and perhaps the reasons why mining companies were not sharing solutions and other issues related to mine safety. The afternoon was spent looking at different voices reacting to a crisis in a panel discussion. So the idea here was to present a hypothetical mine disaster situation and to have different people react to it from their standpoint within a mining company under this hypothetical disaster. What we have here in our different voices here representing MSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, is Larry Corte. Our safety manager is Paul Islas. The external lawyer is Donna Pryor. Communications, Kyle Bennett. The in-house lawyer is Matt Bingham. The technical and engineering person is Brad Ross. Our environmental manager is Kathy Arnold. And the insurance carrier and the individual looking at risk management is Dennis Smith. So what we'll do is we'll present the factual situation immediately after the incident, then look at the aftermath, and finally the lessons learned. So let's go to our panel. So what we have is a scenario that primarily put together by Brad Ross, and so we thank him for that. But what I'll do is I'll initially go through our factual situation, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. We'll start out with engineering and technical with Brad, and then certainly I'll allow Larry to jump in wherever he wants to initially. And Larry, you're going to be sort of a gadfly throughout this.
We have a very broad jurisdiction.
Yes. And from that, we'll then go over to our safety manager, next to environmental manager, insurance carrier, then our two lawyers are going to jump in, and finally communications. And so we'll start out with that round and participate and allow our panelists to argue with each other if they so choose to. So let's go to our factual situation, and here we have our crisis that we have set up. Here is an incident at the Blue Moon copper mine. You can see there's a haul road at the bottom of the screen with a grade indicated. There's an access road to a railroad siding, and with a number of acid tank cars there, with the Big Fish River flowing to the left here, and it's the water source for the town. The shop and office is a half mile away over on the left side of the screen. Our overall situation here is the Blue Moon copper mine is an open pit copper mine in the western United States, and the mine uses 240-ton haul trucks. It's a heap leach operation using sulfuric acid, and the acid is brought to the mine in rail tank cars. Each rail tank car has 100 tons of sulfuric acid, and there are 36 tank cars per train. The site conditions, we have a mountainous area. It's an unusually wet spring, similar to what we have occasionally in this area, has resulted in a thicker than usual growth of grasses and weeds, and the hot summer has created a large fire hazard. I think that a lot of us are familiar again with what our situation is here. The Big Fish River runs through the property, which is a source for community water for the downstream community. And this incident is taking place at 3 a.m. on July 5th. The significance there is it's the day after a holiday. Okay, here's our situation. We have a haul truck that's coming down the river and has gone through that opening through the access road and has hit the acid tank cars. There's the initial showing here. We don't no sign of braking or trying to avoid the accident. The low berms are really there to for visibility to turn onto the haul road, and the truck has hit the train cars going approximately 45 miles an hour. Here's what happens. The immediate impact, we have 13 tankers involved. 4 tankers have been ruptured. And so you've got 500 tons of sulfuric acid involved. 3 ruptured tank cars discharge into the Big Fish River. 2 are tangled up with the haul truck, and one is partially submerged. And the truck driver probably died on impact. Within 10 minutes here, the grass fire starts from the incident, and it's accelerated by hydrogen gas that is generated. Mayday is called by the grader operator within 5 minutes of the accident. 2 employees, the grader and a water truck operator, die trying to rescue the truck driver from acid burns and toxic fumes from the fire. The rear tires on the truck ignite, and the mine EMS arrived on the scene, and that's all within 10 minutes here. And so you can see the wind direction is indicated, and the acid contamination is flowing downstream. Within 30 minutes, the haul truck is engulfed in flames and heating up fuel tankers. The mine emergency crew starts to spray water to try to put out the fire. This actually causes the first of 3 tanker explosions, severely injuring 2 emergency team members. The remaining emergency team evacuates an area for a half mile. A command center is set up at the office building, and the county EMS arrive on scene. Within 60 minutes now, a decision is made to let the fire burn itself out. The first reports of employees at the shop becoming ill. Shop offices are shut down. Are shut downwind from the fire, and the decision is made to evacuate the shop and office complex, including the command center. So we did see the wind direction is going back towards the office complex. Within 120 minutes, this is 2 hours after the incident, the first reporters arrive on the scene asking what happened. News has reached families, and many are obviously worried about the spouses, sons, or daughters have been hurt or injured. MSHA arrives on the scene and placed the mine under a 103K order. Within 4 hours, The first call from the city water company, the water department, because the Big Fish River is a primary water source for the local town, and you may remember this thing started at 3 o'clock in the morning, so everyone's returning from holiday. Very low pH has been detected and all pumps are shut down. The entire town doesn't have water, and the EPA has been called. We look at the driver of the haul truck, John Smith, 32 years old. He's been with the company for 5 years. Has a good record. He's been late twice in the last month, but no other issues of record. So the short-term impact of the accident here, we have 3 fatalities, 2 seriously injured, 15 hospitalized from toxic smoke, 1 haul truck and 10 tank cars have been destroyed, and 30 acres burned, plus 2 small buildings. So now we go to our team. And so we'll start out with our engineering and technical. Brad Ross, what's your view of the situation here?
Well, as technical manager, I'm mostly concerned about a couple things. Number one, that we are managing the site appropriately, that we're gathering as much information as we can, but we want to make sure that people are safe, first of all. So typically the technical manager will be involved with the incident command, usually supporting the incident commander. And so we've helped set up, make sure that we've got everybody at the incident command center, that we've got all the appropriate people, all the resources that are available, and we've also started to send people to gather information about the truck, about the location, although we probably can't get to the location as much as we want to. We also get caught up in the fact that we've had to move incident command, and that causes a great disruption for us in the fact that it causes a lot more chaos. We had the command center, we had everything in plan, we had previous plans to how to approach these types of issues, and it just got thrown out because we no longer have good communications, because the command center is trying to find the location. We're trying to make sure that we can get everybody in one place so that we can start to organize both the recovery, keeping people safe, and gather the data. And that's ended up causing a major problem for us, the fact that we've had to move. And so, but what we're doing for the most part is relaying information to the incident command and making sure that we recovered making sure that the information for people contacting MSHA have the information that they need.
Thank you. MSHA, how would Larry? How would what's MSHA's first reaction here?
Well, we were notified within 15 minutes of the accident pursuant to the severity of the situation by the operator, and that there were both a fire and a fatality, at least an expectation of that. So under that section of their obligations, they were in full compliance. Once we got notified, we immediately contacted our headquarters, because based on the information received, it was a multiple fatality situation. So we're going to be coordinating with Arlington to a certain extent, but we're going to be on the ground as soon as we can. We've sent 3 of our best field investigators and authorized representatives who are familiar with the property to the site. It's a few miles away from our office, obviously. And being in the state and having a state mine inspector, we gave a courtesy call to the mine inspector, letting them know that we had been notified making sure that they were also notified of the event. Turned out that they were also notified by the operator. So the first 15 minutes are pretty critical from a regulatory standpoint and also from an operating standpoint to notify all the authorities of the situation. And it turns out the operator also notified the local sheriff and first responders. So all of the necessary agencies and stakeholders have been notified, which is appropriate. Upon the first telephone call that we got, we put the situation in what we call a J order. We haven't been out on the property yet to assess a K order. So telephonically, we said, look, keep everything under control, but continue to do what you're doing in terms of first response authority that you have.
So what do you mean by the K order?
A K order is when you're on the ground as the agent of the Mine Safety and Health Administration to make sure that all the activities to mitigate the fire and the recoveries are appropriately being handled. Obviously, you're going to defer to the operator who has first responder liaison and some expertise and mine rescue recovery expertise as well. But you're going to be speaking with that operator in the Situation Control Center and then addressing whatever needs to be addressed in terms of keeping the mine stable, making sure that the mine is on shutdown mode so that no miners are in peril. In other words, operations stop within the affected area almost immediately.
All right. Paul, you're the safety manager. I imagine this is probably one of your worst nightmares.
Yeah.
How are you addressing it?
You're absolutely right. There's a lot of moving parts in regards to this accident that happened. And I received the accident happened about 3 o'clock in the morning. I received a call at about 3. I looked at my clock on the dresser. It was about 3:33. At that point, I was informed by our shift supervisor that a call had been placed to MSHA. Larry's correct in saying that MSHA did issue a 103J order because of the rescue and recovery. At this point, my biggest concern is making sure that the place is the area is secure, which has been per the order that was issued over the phone. But one of the things at this point is that right now people have different thoughts about what might happen. And now my biggest concern is making sure that now that MSHA is on site, that the people that they start to interview, especially our salary folks, know what to say and not to say. I know I can't tell them not to speak to MSHA, but at the same time, some of them are concerned about approaching, is it okay for us to talk to the mine inspectors? And
Now, when you say they need to know what to say and what not to say, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, as we all know, we know that over the years, sadly having been involved in some of these cases like this, that the mine inspectors have a particular job to do, and I choose to believe it's still to find out exactly what happened, how to prevent that. But in the course of that, since MSHA's strict laws under MSHA strict liability, everything comes back to the operator. And so we have done a lot of work in helping our supervisors know how to interact with the inspectors. And I just want to make sure that they have to be real cognizant of the fact that the things that they may say during a given investigation could come back to haunt them, so to speak, if I can use that word.
So I think that what we're saying, again, following up what was said this morning, is we're looking what specifically happened factually without speculating as to a cause or
exactly, and basically what we've instructed or told our supervisors that their rights under the Mine Act 2 is they're not obligated to have to speak to them at all. I mean, they can request counsel to be present. In fact, they want to speak to them. But if they choose to do that, we've drilled into them that they have to state the facts. If they do not know, then just say they don't know. If there's a question that's making them uncomfortable, then they can stop and just let the inspector know that, hey, at this point I'm choosing not to say something or answer the question, or maybe just change the subject in some way. But my biggest concern right now is that part of it. But also at the same time, while MSHA's here, we're also would like to find out exactly what happened. But as we all know, they have jurisdiction over, they've taken over the investigation. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're also involved in finding out what they're finding out, because we've learned over the years that sometimes, sad to say, that the mine inspectors don't always get it right. And so we want to make sure that, first of all, what happened, what can we do to prevent it? And you know, there's a lot of rumors going out in town right now, and people are talking this and this is what happened. And so we're trying to hopefully control some of that news getting out of the market.
Well, speaking of news, we have the community that's downstream, and so that's going to put a lot of pressure on our environmental manager. And so, Kathy, why don't you weigh in on what's on your plate this morning?
Well, I got notified late. They forgot to call me until 3:45, so I didn't know what was going on. I got the call finally though, and when I did, I got enough information to make the notifications that I was supposed to make immediately. Everybody always thinks about safety, and it's important to know that, but I had to call the National Response Center and the local and state emergency planning commissions, and neither of those places got notified. So I had to kind of give me a mea culpa and basically beg for forgiveness and just let everybody know that there was a problem with the notifications, but we let them know as soon as we found out. I passed on what information I had at the time, which was pretty limited. I'm going to have to follow up, but I did get the appropriate incident response numbers, so I can follow up and clean the record up as I go along, which is not a fatal flaw, but we did not meet the requirements. When I arrived at the site, I had the EMS team that was initially called removed and put our hazardous response technicians in place to make sure that all the work was being done, so that everybody who had the proper training was doing the work, not just people who were trained to give CPR and take care of health, because everybody was thinking health, and there are some significant training requirements for doing a response. The other thing that I did was I took over incident command for a little while until we got the appropriate people in, because you do have to have the appropriate training in order to do that work. And if you don't have that training, that's a violation of the rules. So I took that on myself, and then as the people got there, Paul and I were able to sort out exactly who should be in charge and who should be running the incident. But we did switch it from a safety and fatality incident to a environmental management and hazardous materials response opportunity as things progressed during the morning. By calling the local emergency response commission, they knew when they saw low pH in the water what was going on and what they had to do to protect the townspeople. And so by shutting off the pumps, that was something that was important for them to do and important for them to understand. But we also were able to, at that time, start making calls to have water trucked in from a nearby town. So that's something that we're going to have to do for a long time and pay for that. That's going to be on us, at least until we figure out what the next source of water is, because you can't have people without water. Otherwise, it makes communicating with the local community kind of hard. And so once we get that all sorted out and we start to do our responding, then there's really not a lot we can do to clean up until we can get into the site and make sure that things are going on. So at this point, we're monitoring until we get cleared to actually get into the site and start doing some cleanup and work.
Well, I think that this is about the time someone says, maybe it's time to call the lawyers. And so I think that what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to both our internal and external lawyers as to see how their job fits into this scenario.
Well, I'm happy to find out about this as early as possible. So hopefully it's soon after safety and environmental. The big obvious thought here for a lawyer is the liability. Who's going to sue us? What's our exposure? What agencies are going to be coming after us with enforcement cases? Are they going to try to shut down the operation? And, you know, at least with MSHA and Clean Water Act, there's also a possibility of criminal charges if those facts are present. So I know one of the first questions I'm going to get from senior management is, how bad is this? What's going to happen? You know, what's this going to cost us? Obviously, after they ask about the safety issues. And for me, however, in the short term, I mean, these things are going to play out over the next weeks and months, but in the short term, the most important thing for me is trying to understand the facts and what happened, because that's the first step in all of these other issues about liability and about our violations of different statutes, is what the facts were. And so I would want to manage and start immediately with an internal investigation. And there are really two pillars of that investigation. Number one is I want to understand all of the relevant facts of the situation, even especially the bad facts. If there are bad facts out there, I want to know about them as soon as possible. So number one is understanding the facts. Number two is I want to be able to control the information that's generated as part of this investigation. So I would absolutely be working with outside counsel to try to make sure that this entire process is managed in a way that will give us the best chance of preserving all of this information under attorney-client privilege, so that we do have some control over when it's released. I've got a big list of some of the facts that I would want to look at. I'll just go through some of them. As we're going through here, when we think about liability, I'm looking at this from a sense of, did we do something wrong here? Is there something we could have done better, or something that we should have done that could have avoided this situation? I want to start with people who observed the driver that day, John Smith. We have some statements that indicate there might be some issues there with his fitness for work. So I want to interview the employees that had made those observations about the 4th of July party, about who saw him at work that morning, understand exactly what they saw. I would want to look at his employee file to understand if there are any other issues beyond the late citations that were disclosing the facts. Also to make sure that he hasn't opted out of workers' comp, which would be unusual, but I want to confirm that. With the truck, there were complaints about the truck's brakes, so I want to talk to those people and understand exactly what led to the complaints. Look at the maintenance records for the truck to understand if it was in a condition that was fit for operation. Maintenance, the berms and the grass, I want to understand if we have any process for maintaining these in a safe condition, or if we usually do some kind of program to control the grass and weeds in that area. The last one I'll mention is just the layout of this whole scenario. I mean, just looking at the drawing raises a question of whether this whole layout is actually safe with the 10% grade downhill going straight towards these acid tankers. I want to understand if there are any design violations in the way that's laid out, but also understand if we've had any prior accidents or near misses that are anyway similar to this one. That, again, all of this could relate to our responsibility and our ultimate liability. So that's my immediate focus would be trying to get that internal investigation going, working with outside counsel to try to maintain attorney-client privilege for as much as possible.
All right, well, speaking of outside counsel, how do you see your role in this, Donna?
I'll show up within 24 hours of the accident as soon as I can, depending on where I am. Got my steel-toe boots ready to go, and I am on site. I mean, you've got to understand everyone's very upset when this is happening, and you are really just helping everyone get through it. The agency's on site, they're going to give a list of documents. hopefully in writing, and we're going to go through them, and we'll hopefully get those in a timely manner. Then they're going to have a list of people they want to speak with, as Paul mentioned. I'm going to make sure I interview them first and make sure they want to speak to MSHA. It's their right to speak to MSHA or not. And the same is true for hourly and management. You can talk or you cannot talk. You can have me present. You could do it in a Holiday Inn Express. You could do it wherever you want. It's your interview, and I let everyone know their rights. Then if they let me sit on the interview, I would. I'd write down everything that's said, and then that witness would also have the option of signing a statement, and I would go over that statement with them. So another thing that we don't have anyone covering HR at the table, but these people are very upset. This is their colleague and their friend that they've lost. I'm going to make sure there's an employee assistance program on site, and we're going to have counseling on site or in a safe location nearby where people can go and get their counseling, because that's important. There's so much going on, and I think Matt, or if there's an in-house counsel, is going to take care of so much coordination, because he's going to have to talk with communications about what's being said. He's going to have to talk to the insurance company. There's obviously toxic torts concerns, local damage control, even just simple things like, are there still minors on the property and are they posting their photos on Facebook of this issue? There's so much to get a hold of and get under control at that point. I'm going to be helping Matt do all of this, or as much as I can, on site. It's important to note that not everyone has in-house counsel, or if their in-house counsel might be in, Australia or Vancouver, and they don't want to do this. And so I can take on that role if needed as well. But those are my initial concerns when I'm dealing with the agency, is not getting an impeding citation and getting accused of impeding the investigation. And it's important to note a lot of these interviews and this kind of information is not going to start being collected until after the fire's out, after bodies are recovered, and the first focus is going to be rescue and recovery. Then all of this is going to start happening.
Well, this really brings in our situation for insurance. And our insurance representative here is Dennis Smith, McLaurin's International. Dennis, when are you usually called on this type of an accident?
I'm on vacation. No. I'm assuming that the company has a very experienced and qualified risk management department, and they are basically an essential part of the crisis management group who have been informed about this tragedy. Insurance is not going to be first and foremost on the priority. There are many other things to take care of, including the stabilization of the site, communications with the outside world, employees, stakeholders, and those include shareholders, customers, everybody that touches this facility that in some way will have been impacted by this particular tragedy. At the right time, when the site has been stabilized, third-party access is allowable, and that includes the adjusters that will be appointed on behalf of the insurance companies. Then there can be a plan in place to address the exposures and start the loss adjustment investigation. Should I also say that there are going to be a number of policies that are going to be in vogue here, and I'll touch on them very briefly. I'll divide them up into first-party coverage and third-party coverage. The first-party coverage will be the property owned by the insured, or the property in the care, custody and control of the insured, which they may have a responsibility to insure. This could come under the headings of the rail tankers, for example. Just the mere fact that they use them, they may have a liability or a contractual responsibility to insure them, so they're going to become part of the first party. Then we have the situation, of course, with the truck. I assume it's not registered for the highway. It's just simply operational within the confines of the mine. And of course we have the driver. Is he an employee or is he a contractor, which defines whether or not it's workers' comp versus perhaps a liability exposure. Once we've sort of got all those coverages through the risk manager, he will then have a duty to advise his broker, and then the broker will discharge their responsibility by informing the respective carriers then the adjusters, because there's going to be many attached to the different aspects of coverage, all racing to the scene to try and get a grip and get facts as quickly as they can. But I must say, to avoid the usual catastrophe and calamity that happens with a busload of characters all waiting to bust through the gates to get information, it needs to be controlled. And it will be controlled through either in-house counsel or external counsel or in collaboration with the risk manager. But the most important thing here is a pre-loss management plan, I'm hoping, will have been engaged and understood before the accident. A pre-loss management plan basically is as important as a catastrophe or crisis management plan. They really work hand in hand together. The pre-loss management plan will identify, for example, how we notify the insurer, who will take care of that, who will be the adjuster, who will perhaps be some other experts that will be collaborating in this entire process. So once that's understood and the trigger is hit and the site itself has been deemed safe and secure, we can then go through the next phase, which I call one plan, 1 point, 1 person. In other words, when we have the adjuster role on site, say for the property damage or consequential business interruption, we don't want a whole tribe of people giving him information because we won't have any control. So we need to identify one access person, in this case representing Blue Moon, who will be the purveyor of all of the information. And information will be requested in writing, it'll be assessed, and obviously it'll then be passed back for the adjuster in the operation. The adjuster will probably also arrange for experts who will want to get into the proximate cause. And in this case, we've identified it as the truck. Point made about the brakes will clearly need to be examined, particularly if there's some thought or concern that you have outside vendors or maintenance people take care of this program. And then comes the issue about potential subrogation or recovery, should it be found that the vehicle was poorly maintained through third-party experts. That's just it on the surface. There's a lot more in terms of the actual site, how it was shut down, the impacts on production, the business interruption, the sale of the product, whether it's through contract or spot market. That's all other details that are associated with the claims management, particularly from the economic loss side. I already mentioned the other coverage. We've got environmental cleanup exposures, we'll be looking at the environmental risks. We have general liability policies, we'll be looking at the overall exposures in regards to perhaps the stream and other occupancies downwind, if you like, that were perhaps affected, in addition to the safety of the town's water supply.
All right, Kyle Bennett, we've got a boatload of reporters out there at your front gate. Your job is in communications. What's on your plate?
Well, I'm just going to say, to start, it's really weird to have somebody ask me a question from the back, and I'm not going to look at it. But with that being said, look, typically in a situation like this, I'm very fortunate to be one of the first people generally called, because in these types of situations, obviously our reputational risk is at stake. We have a lot of liability. So in this scenario, 120 minutes, it said, until the first reporters show up on site. For me, that's going to go by pretty quick, but that's generally much more time than I'm given in a situation like this. What I'm really focused on initially is ensuring that we are the source for the news media, for our employees, and for our stakeholders, which is our elected officials, other key stakeholders, so that we can be that source of information. When we're first called into a group like this, which is what we call a business resilience team, or crisis communications team, the key thing is ensuring the individuals on my team understand the roles and accountabilities, and to make sure that we've done some practice before something like this happens. Because when you have a situation like this, all hands on deck. And so what I want to do initially is, in addition to making sure my team understands their roles, it is really to gather basic facts. I'm going to be working very close with with you, and I'm going to be working very close with you, because the key thing in order for us to establish ourselves as the point of contact and the key communication source for moving forward, we're going to have to put out just key basic facts. We're not going to speculate about anything. We're going to just talk about what we know at the time, generally what happened in basic details. We're not going to talk about people's condition. We're going to talk about our emergency response, how we're treating people, how we're securing the scene, and any other steps that our legal group is going to be comfortable with us talking about. So initially, we're going to issue a statement. We're going to communicate in this order: to employees first, to the community and our stakeholders second, and to the media third. Oftentimes, that will be within seconds of each other. But it's important that all of those individuals are communicated with quickly. And then we also want to put in basically the kind of the key steps that are going to help us manage this moving forward. So we're going to establish a communication hotline for our employees, and we're going to give them the number for that. We're going to tell them how often we're going to update that moving forward. Every 2 hours, you're going to be getting a number, so call this number every 2 hours. And every 2 hours, there's going to be a new updated voice recording on that. We're going to do the same thing with our stakeholders, and especially with the media. I'm going to be issuing basic facts to them to give them something to write a story, because they're going to write a story whether we're sharing or not. And it's important that they get the facts from us to write that story. If I have 120 minutes, I'm also going to be focusing very quickly on establishing where we're going to hold everybody. And in a real life situation, if this is a location where it's visible from the road, chances are we have a point established, a media point established, where we would hold a press conference or something like that with something like this, and then we're going to get ready to address the media within 120 minutes. And again, that's not very long, but it's just going to be basic facts, and that's what we're going to do initially.
Kyle, in the preparation of your remarks to the press and the public, how much of that is coordinated through the other responsible officials at the mine?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The reason why I highlighted Brad and I highlighted legal is because there are so many different work streams in a situation like this. Insurance, somebody's dealing with our regulators, environmental. I need somebody that I can go to get information, the basic facts about what's going on here, and I need somebody to approve the communication. Those are the people I'm going to be most focused on. I'm not going to be making a lot of different calls. I'm going to be working with the people the one person who's got the vast majority of the information, and then the folks who can approve the information for us to disseminate.
How much of that is likely to be a situation where you're sitting on like we've seen a lot of the press conferences, you're standing in front with a number of other folks within the company standing behind you?
Well, I think, certainly there are times in this when you want subject matter experts, if I understand your question. However, I would not rely on those individuals initially. I would probably take the responsibility, have our official spokesperson addressing this initially, so that the key individuals in those technical roles can be doing their job in order to secure the scene, treating people, making sure our business can start moving forward as quickly as possible. Our communications team can take the responsibility, and later on, when additional details are coming out about the causes or some of the other issues, that's when I would probably choose to bring in a subject matter expert to help address questions at a press conference. In a situation like this, where we obviously are going to have water issues, it will be going on for days, weeks, and potentially months, and so there will be a lot of opportunity to do that later on. But right now, we're just focused on being proactive with facts to get the story out and establish ourselves as the source for information.
Good. So at this point, we're a day or so into the accident. Larry, from MSHA's standpoint, are there any further observations at this point?
Yes, our objective are to meet several critical issues, including gathering of evidence, and we appreciate all the cooperation from the operator and their counsel facilitating this. We've conducted our witness interviews of key witnesses on the operating side. Some we had a different number of witnesses than those proposed by the operator, and were able to find some hourly witnesses that gave us valuable information off the property. We were appreciative of getting the maintenance records for the various pieces of equipment. We've coordinated with the Federal Railway Administration for some of their forensic support in terms of the rail car conditions, and they, as a sister agency, are taking a separate look at the rail incident, the various factors with the unit train fate, and the manifests, and various DOT regulations that are collateral to the overall federal effort here, which we'll be getting a report on in due course. There's still a 103K order for the property. There have been various modifications of it to allow rescue, forensic reports, and stabilization of some of the lost sulfuric acid to mitigate the surface and groundwater impacts from the situation. We've been very thankful for the contributions from the first responders, and also from the EPA folks that have come out to assist in terms of dealing with the water impacts, which is a little bit out of our expertise, but we're still appreciative of that effort. In conjunction with all stakeholders, including the operator, we put together a corrective action plan that includes stabilization of the evidence, but also the initial steps of removing debris and preserving evidence that's appropriate for final analysis, with the objective of being able to resume the mine operations, which I know the operator would like to do, as well as the short-haul rail carrier that was in charge of the unit train. Several of our experts are dealing with the forensic side of this, including working with the local medical examiner's office to gather medical examination and autopsy records. And we understand that the operator is going to be doing their root cause analysis. We're also doing a parallel effort based on the evidence that we've obtained. And we're also evaluating it at perhaps a much higher level at this point for possible enforcement.
All right, you've talked about your orders and modifications to those orders. What form do those orders and modifications take?
They're in written form, and they're dictated by statute, but in essence, they request that all evidence be preserved, and that access to areas that have been impaired only be conducted with prior approval by our site coordinating administrative officer from the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and that proposals for debris removal or other mitigations go through that approval process. The K order stands, but it's subject to modification. At that point, when the situation is understood, evidence is preserved, witnesses have been interviewed, and root cause analysis has more or less been put together, we will lift the K order and allow production.
Yeah, what I was really focusing on is when you have a fluid situation from MSHA's standpoint, and you have an order in place and you're looking at modifications of that order. Are these, how are those modifications made? Is this an oral communication or followed in writing? Or?
They're reduced to writing.
So that's our part of my job is we put the plans together to submit with safety. So we put the plans together, it goes to safety would generally go to MSHA. Here's how we're going to make sure that nobody else gets hurt. So that's the first plan, and then what we're going to do, what precautions we're going to take, and who's going to do what. So we'll submit that to the safety group so that they can take it on to Henshaw.
Right. And then to supplement that technical and engineering review, we have our staff of engineers from tech support out of our Pittsburgh and Beckley and Arlington office. They're helping us as well. We don't have the in-depth expertise, for example, in rail car forensics and things, so that we're going to rely to a certain extent on the FRA to assist us in understanding that. So we matrix the technical evaluations on K order modifications at this point.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, let's take a look at what we may know after the aftermath here. We obviously have what's happened on the ground and our initial investigations. We're looking at, first of all, the driver and the truck. We have alluded to some of these through our first discussions. The long-term impact of the incident is the mine is shut down for 2 weeks for investigation, and the city water system is shut down for 2 weeks. We've looked at the driver of the haul truck. We've got more information about poor John Smith. He was seen at the 4th of July celebration having a very good time. But the supervisor didn't see any issues at the start of the shift. But the fellow employee said that he had bloodshot eyes and a hung head down during the meeting. And there's also reports that John was recently separated and was depressed. There may be mechanical issues with the truck. There have been long-term complaints about the brakes on that particular truck, and the truck recently completed a rebuild performed by a third party.
Is that a review for the brakes, or is that related to the brakes?
So it is related to the rebuild was done to the brakes. So let's go back to our panel. On the panel, I think for our continuing discussion, I think that I'll let any of you jump into this process as you please. Maybe the first one should be insurance.
No, I'm going to keep the insurance guy out of it.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Sorry, I really am. But I think I am going to hire some third-party experts, and I'm going to hire them. So Larry might not know about it, or he might, but I'm going to try and keep it privileged as long as I can. And those third-party experts, well, first of all, I'll have the autopsy report, and I might have somebody look at the analysis that was done on blood alcohol level or whatever else we need to look at. And then third-party experts can look at the truck or any other equipment that we need investigated, as long as we have permission to get near the equipment from MSHA. And then there's going to be a bunch of other interviews. For example, other people who have operated that truck, and the experience they have, and of course, all of their pre-op inspection cards of that truck, because we definitely have incidents where people have said, oh yeah, I reported stuff about that truck for years, we didn't do anything. And I look at their pre-op cards, if they don't have anything on them, then they're clearly not reporting those issues. So how could the company have knowledge or liability for that? So I'm going to look at all that. And any other, I mean, it's interesting because when you first get on the site, and Paul knows this probably better than any of us, anything you think might have happened, 2 days in, it could be totally different. And so you really have to look at all this with open eyes and just kind of keep digging, because the longer you go, the more information you find out.
From an insurance perspective, First party, on a property policy where the vehicle is not registered for the road, there are no exclusions relevant to .05 drug use or anything else. It doesn't consider that at all. What it will be considering, of course, is the proximate cause as to what was wrong with the brakes, and as you lead into it, the appropriate appointment. And those costs could be shared because it's for the benefit of everybody to understand the service records and the history regarding the brake maintenance and what it may be. To the point regarding the mine being shut down 2 weeks for investigation, most property policies have clauses relating to protection and preservation of property and steps that are taken to mitigate the loss to make sure that everything is preserved. And in addition to our good friends at MSHA, the time that they take in closing the site under the civil authorities situation, you usually have 30 days of coverage there that will provide business interruption, in addition to the drivers that will be examined that are also the triggers for business interruption. That would be not just a truck, but we assume that the rail cars are insured property as well, and if they are providing sulfuric acid, which is essential to the process, you need to get more rail cars. And without the rail cars, you can't get the sulfuric acid, so I'd understand the process to be impaired, and which is all part of the measurement of the business interruption. So.
Let's turn to our safety manager, Paul. Any observations as to the procedures we have here?
Well, so for me, it's a very somber time for us because, we have 3 of our employees that are no longer with us, and there's 3 families that are having to make funeral arrangements. And so I live in the community where these 3 gentlemen resided. I'm very much part of the community. It affects me probably just as much as it affects every one of the other employees that we have on the site. One of the things that I have cautioned, continue to caution our supervisors in regards to interviews, and I know they've all talked to Matt and they've talked to Don. It's just do not allow the Larry's kind demeanor to fool you. I have been with inspectors, and some of them are really good at getting your defenses down. And I'm not saying we should be in fighting defense. I just keep telling them be very, very cautious of that. One of the things that's kind of concerning to me as a safety manager is I have some employees coming to me and telling me that, and I've shared this with Matt and Donna, that this isn't the first time that John has come in, with bloodshot eyes. Even though the supervisor says he never saw him, now in talking to the supervisor says, well, I saw him from a distance. I really wasn't up close and really was able to see what was really going on with him. But now I'm having employees saying, hey, Paul, this is not the first time they showed up that way. We've told the supervisor about it. And it seems like it's just fallen on deaf ears. And then I also keep hearing that, and I know this for a fact, about a month and a half ago, this conversation came up about that very intersection in a safety meeting. And some of our employees have complained about the fact that that's just not, we need to redesign that area. And so I'm being very cautious of not sharing that information. But once again, as a safety manager, I'm looking at, the principle of multiple causes, that it's really easy to blame John for this whole incident, but something broke down in our management system that allowed this to happen. And so I'm real cognizant of the fact that I want to let our employees know that we can't jump to conclusions and just put everything on John. That I'm as much to blame probably for things that I failed to do or not do in this whole part of the conversation. But those are things that I'm keeping real close to the chest, and just only sharing it with certain people, because at the end of the day, this is something as a safety manager, along with some of our other managers, that we're going to have to address. And I'm not trying to jump to conclusions, because Dawn she's correct, she's spot on. You may think that this is what happened, but 5 days later you find out a whole different scenario. So I'm trying to keep an open mind about it, that accident investigation is about fact-finding, not fault-finding, and we're just trying to stick to the facts. But I'm just letting people know that we've got 3 funerals that we're planning for, and we got to keep that in mind. and not start blaming folks amongst, and start pointing fingers at one another, because that's when Larry is going to have a field day. So we just got to be careful of that.
You mentioned that in your position as a safety manager, you may have had some hints on potential problems out there. From your perspective, when is it appropriate for the safety manager to start taking proactive steps on perceived problems?
Personally, I think it needs to be, you really need to look at the situation for what it's, the person that you're talking to, and really look at that, because the way I see it, I want to put myself in their shoes. If I had a concern and I come to you as a safety manager about a concern, I want to know what your thoughts are and what you're going to do about it. So personally, I believe that you need to address everything that comes along, at least have a conversation. You may not have the answer right then, and if you don't have all the facts, you're going to let the employer know, let me look into it, but I will get back with you. The worst thing that we can do as safety professionals and as environmental folks is somebody comes to you with a situation and you just kind of like, it goes in one ear and out the other, and you just shake your head, duly noted, and you go about your business. Because at that point, then it's malpractice on my end as far as a safety manager not to address those concerns, no matter how small they are. I've learned really, really early in my career as a manager on the safety side that the worst thing that's going to get you into trouble is not addressing those concerns. I never want to be a part of being criminally investigated because I failed to do my job as a safety manager.
And on the legal side, as far as worrying about it, the federal rules of evidence and post-remedial measures rule will protect you, because if you take actions that can correct the hazard, there's a rule of evidence that says that cannot be held against you. So you shouldn't be shy about correcting conditions immediately because you're protected from them.
I guess my biggest concern is that I heard somebody told me a month and a half ago this came up and I was left out of the loop. And much like Kathy was left out of the loop, no call was made. So I'm learning all this after the fact, because after a tragedy like this, then everybody's a Tweety bird and just they're saying whatever. But I haven't said anything yet. I'm going to wait till this thing dies down. But behind closed doors, we're going to have some discussions with some of our supervisors, and we're going to go, unless MJ starts looking at safety meeting documents and notes of what was brought up and conditions. That's something that we should have, if it was that, people were that concerned about it, someone should have taken action, or somebody should at least involve the safety department and technical services, because I think they're just finding out about it too.
Good. Well, we're dumping it back onto our communications department. Kyle is in looking at follow-up after the incident. What's on your plate at this point?
So I think these types of scenarios progress through, in my head, what I think of are many different stages of communications. I'm going to continue with the media to give them updates that I can provide them. But the other thing I'm going to do, because once something like this happens, we address the initial facts about what happened. Oftentimes what they then start talking about is, obviously the mine's shut down, we're not producing anything. They're going to start talking about jobs. They're going to start talking about fatalities. So there's a lot to manage from that perspective. So what I want to keep doing with the media is giving them pieces as we can. So once we have additional details about the environmental piece, for example, we're going to talk proactively about the steps that we're taking to mitigate any impacts, what we know about the impacts at that time. The reality is that, unfortunately, we're going to have to address the fatalities. With our media world that we live in right now and how fragmented it is in terms of traditional media and social media, a lot of new developing media channels, the reality is once we've given the respect to the families and spoken to the families at some point, of course with your blessing, we're gonna have to share the fact that we have had some fatalities, And then the other thing I think that's really important for me at this point in time as well is to buy us some time. And we can do that by simply saying that we don't have all the details, but it's under a thorough investigation. We're cooperating with the regulatory agencies very closely to get our business back up and running. And then, you know, if possible, and it's not always possible, but if we can, let's give them a time frame. You know, say, you know, we're going to give more details to you in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then so when we're talking about what's actually happened as far as why this happened, the causes, that buys us a little bit of time there, and it allows us to address the other thing, like business continuity and a lot of these other things that we're going to have to deal with in the meantime.
I suppose from the, again, from the insurance standpoint, from the liability side, both the general liability and the environmental side of things, with the collaboration with the insurer, steps that can be taken by the mine to make sure, for example, that there's a supplemental water supply made available for the town during the duration of the 2 weeks when it's allegedly impaired until tests show that it's back to normal. Similarly, the folks that sustained, or say, minor smoke injuries that were hospitalised, whatever steps could be taken to meet their medical expenses and defray some of their costs would only be seen as goodwill, and perhaps, you know, show the company in a very, very good light as good community citizens, polarised against perhaps all the bad press that could come out of this.
Sure. No, I think anything that we're doing from a proactive perspective, we absolutely have to just, you know, shout that through a variety of channels. And again, we have to just continue to communicate with our employees through our social media channels, and obviously with the community and our stakeholders. But those types of updates are going to be really critical.
Very much so.
Well, let's move over to Kathy. I saw you making notes there.
I think we have an obligation to report and clear up any confusion within 15 days with all of the planning commissions and all of the emergency response places, the National Response Center. EPA will not have heard for 14 days. Nobody has to notify them. So if they've gotten a phone call and decided to come out and help, that's an odd thing. Usually EPA doesn't do any response. So we will be gathering data, make sure that we understand exactly what happened, exactly how much acid is spilled, exactly how much ended up in the water. We will have had our hazardous materials technicians do what they can to mitigate. So whether it's treating with lime at the site once they have access, building berms to make sure nothing else runs into the water, those kind of things. We'll have people actually doing that work to make sure that we're not continuing to contaminate the environment. So we'll go through and do all of those things and get our reporting in order, make sure that the lawyers are aware of what we're reporting, not running it through them, actually. I've never run an emergency response report through a lawyer for approval. I've always just done the reporting. So it's kind of like hey, this is what's happened here, and it's very factual. Nothing, no speculation, just always, this is what's happened, this is where it is. Check with everybody to make sure that my facts are the same as everyone else's facts, and there's a lot of fact finding. The other thing that we do is I'm going to start looking at how many reported spills we had in that railway siding. I'm going to look to see if there were berms that were supposed to be in place and why they weren't in place to actually direct any spills or any kind of things to keep it out of the river, what we can plan. I'll also have people monitoring the river. We'll have people monitoring the flows, monitoring quality. I will have taken 2 or 3 samples every day for a long time, figuring out exactly what's in the river to make sure that we're not harming anyone, and we'll track pH on a regular basis, and that's probably going to happen a lot more often than 2 or 3 times, just so that we can give assurances and make sure that the town turns their pumps back on as soon as they can. In the meantime, again, we will have already arranged for portable water supply to be brought in from somewhere else, trucked in. We'll work with the Planning Commission on how that's going to be managed and who should get the water, where it's going to be put into their system. Do you need it to flush your toilet, or is it just drinking water we're bringing in so that when they have drinking water and brushing their teeth, how are we going to manage the resources so that everybody gets what they need? So there's going to be a lot of little things that we'll kind of pick up around the edges while staying out of the big investigation of the safety and AMSHA investigations. And in the meantime, like I said, we'll be preparing our reports and making sure that we meet all of our reporting deadlines, so there's no problem. And we'll look at, were there things that we should have known or that we've been reporting in that area that it's going to raise to light and going to potentially cause us a legal problem. And that's when we make sure the lawyers know.
Well, let's take a look at lessons learned here. How is that checked? The need for employee support programs. And, you know, it's, Brad mentioned things this morning too, that it seems to me the difference between, you know, what goes on in the airline industry. You have the airline crash on October the 29th. The Boeing quickly issued an order warning of potential instrument malfunction after that Indonesia crash, compared to the mining industry on high wall failure on October 30th, and the company released a statement on November the 7th, only after a Facebook user posted a photo of the pit on the public page, and the spokesman said that the mine is not releasing photos of the pit area. Okay. All right, so what I'd like to do now with the panel is just to have go around on the wrap up of our situation here to see, you know, how you see the proper action to be taken by the company in light of some of the safety lessons that we looked at. Let's start with engineering and technical with Brad.
So from the engineering side, when we look at those lessons, there's some pretty major design component. One of them is the haul road and how the berm was placed and where the road came in, and the fact that there was kind of a direct shot. So it's a process safety issue at the end of the day, but it's a design component, and you know, we would worry a lot that if we had other mines within our system or in the industry as well that had the same sort of components, which would be, you know, design-wise, that was actually easy design. It's what you would typically do, because it's the easiest way to get into the area. It may not have been the best way to do it if you're looking at it through a process safety component. So, you know, we would want to be sharing that throughout the industry. And the real question is can we? And how do we go about that?
So let's turn next to our safety manager, Paul. As an aftermath of this incident, what are you going to do?
Well, there's a number of things that have come up, some directly, some indirectly. One of the big factors, other than what Jay is talking about and looking at the ramp proper, is what are some of the things that we can do proactively to have employees show up for work fit for duty. One of the things, of course, that I was not a proponent of and still have a little bit of heartburn about is putting fatigue seeing machines inside of our haul trucks. But based on what happened, this is something, a move that we're looking to do. But one thing that we're going to do right at the outset on the fatigue management end of the conversation is we haven't done a whole lot on wellness. So, and I know that's voluntary, but I still think that part of the way people show up for work has something to do with lifestyles. So there's a component that we're doing there. We've actually hired a nutritional professional to come in to kind of look at what a program would look like for us at our mine site that would also encompass the families. But another thing that we've done, we found another tool, a proactive tool on the market called Alert Meter. And Alert Meter is, it's actually, it's on an iPad. You take it on an iPad, you put it on the wall, and you actually take a test that measures your cognitive type activity that's going on. And so if in fact Mr. Smith or John had come in that day and trying to take that place, it would have alerted, dispatch would have alerted the supervisor that there was something not quite right with him at the time. And so not just looking at haul truck drivers, but looking at just our company as a whole, looking at fatigue management and making sure our employees show up for fit for duty. There are some other lessons that we've learned too in regards to some of the training for our employees, especially on haul trucks. One of the things that we've instituted is making sure that when they crest the hill, that they dial in their retarder at a certain speed. And we've actually put signs up right at the very top that says, as you crest, you need to dial in at this amount. And they have to actually dial it in on the haul truck at 8 miles an hour, whatever it may be. So then it's really kind of like an automatic factor in just controlling that speed as they're going down. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we need to continue to look at, is there any more additional factors that we could add in there, other layers, other control measures that we could take. And so there's some more coming on, but those are the main things that we've done initially, and we're hoping that by using the alert meter in conjunction with the C9 machines and the haul trucks, that's going to help greatly reduce the possibility of this happening again. And we're sharing some of those findings. Hopefully, we can share some of those findings with some of the rest of our fellow, with our rest of the industry and some of our fellow colleagues.
Well, let's turn to the lawyers to see what their view is on the aftermath.
Well, I think the big takeaway for me is you want to do as much as you can beforehand to prepare for this kind of situation. Especially for the internal team, there might be people on the team that rarely deal with these kind of situations, or maybe once in a career. So you want to have a crisis management plan beforehand that identifies responsibilities and who's going to do what and who the key contacts are, so that you're not trying to scramble and figure that out after this event has happened and everyone's kind of panicking. On the legal side, there are certain things that we could do before something like this happens to help prepare. So from a communications perspective, our employees should know that they are not authorized to talk to the press for the company, and that we prefer that they not share photos or other information about work sites through their personal media or to the press or any other way. The inspections are something that you need to be prepared for those generally, not just in a crisis management. And so it's another training that the lawyers could do to make sure the employees know what to do when the inspector shows up. That you're going to cooperate, you're going to give them access, but you're also going to be very factual. You're not going to just volunteer information or speculate on things that might be going on. So if they've already been trained on those issues, then that would help us with, after a crisis, of trying to make sure that we're able to manage the information and control it.
Anything to add there, Don?
Yeah, I agree with everything Matt said, largely because he's hired me. But I'll add that as far as sharing of information, we're probably not going to be able to do that until after everything is played out, which could be a couple years down the road, with any kind of litigation we have with family members, MSHA, and EPA, you name it. So sharing might be something we'll be able to do, but not in the near future. I like the alert meter idea, but we're going to have to negotiate with our union to see if we can, they might not allow it. And then there's this kind of labor and employment issue of, if you fail the alert meter test, I know some companies are paying employees to go home. Is everyone going to try and fail the test and go home and get paid? The alert meter companies are saying, oh, you can't fail on purpose. I don't know. We're going to have to figure that one out. And I agree, disaster response plans need to be current. I've seen some of them where there are folks who are retired who are still on the list of people to call. All the phone numbers need to be accurate. For the agencies, sometimes there were the wrong numbers, so it's kind of an ongoing process of who you need to call and when, and that needs to be updated. You should at least look at it yearly to make sure all the right information is on there. I particularly agree that you need to be proactive with the community and work with the insurance company, because you're trying to mitigate your risk in the future, as Kyle said, and so if we've had cases where an entire community had their windows blown out, we're going to jump on that and make sure the windows are replaced and repaired, any kind of cleanup is done. So, I mean, you already have a community that's upset with you because of what happened, regardless of whether or not it's your fault, but you're going to try and do your best to make everybody happy and bring in the water and do everything you can to make everyone safe.
Let's turn to Dennis. Is the insurance carrier going to look at taking any sort of proactive?
They cancelled the policy, they don't. No.
Don't trust them.
No, that's right. No, you can't. No, look, one of the things that happens every year with the company is the fact you go through an insurance renewal. And a lot of people are brought into that process, not just the risk manager, but the broker. And it's not just about price and wording. They're important. The other thing you need to take advantage of is services such as risk engineering. Bring in third parties that are experienced risk control engineers. Give them the full landscape of the project, the whole site evaluation, let them ask questions, make recommendations. And one of the important things about recommendations that are made, whether it be the height of the berm, perhaps the angle of the road, or perhaps there's not speed governors on the trucks, automatic or whatever it may be, anything that may improve this risk, what comes with that is, if we employ these risk management tools, do we get a discount in our premium perhaps? That's something to consider. But one of the things that often accompany these types of things is you have the insurer that comes in and wants to deny a claim based on increase of hazard. Well, you know what? You had the risk manager or the risk engineer show up 6 months ago, and the only question he asked is, what's for lunch? It's over. So this also creates an opportunity not only to get the right people, but to make sure they ask the right questions and they are actually helpful in improving your risk, and they're a third-party service that should be provided as part and package of the insurance renewal program.
Good. Well, let's hear a kind of a wrap up from MSHA. Larry, what do you think?
Well, at this point, we've reviewed our evidence, our forensic review. We've spoken with our tech support folks that were on the ground. We've also spoken with our attorneys at the Department of Labor Solicitor's Office, and there are some intriguing things that have come up, such as the maintenance records and perhaps the lack of candor that seem to have cropped up, at least to us, in terms of the discussions versus the reality. So there are looming in our next step possible enforcement that's conjunctive with our issuance of the final report of fatality. We're going to issue the report of fatality. It's been about 60 or 90 days. And before we issue this, out of respect to the families, we're going to speak to the 3 families in advance, and one of our well-trained professionals is going to reach out to each one of them and discuss with the family what the agency is going to publish. And of course, the policy is to publish this as a means to prevent further hazards and accidents in the future, to learn from the experience and gather what good may come of it. And in that process, we'll certainly hear a lot of feedback from the family as far as that impact, which is one of the things that we consider part of our mission. Shortly thereafter, we will probably issue a number of citations to the operator, including what we consider shortcomings in their maintenance of their equipment, shortcomings in some of their training. We thought that perhaps the pre-shift had some elements that needed to be reviewed and integrated, hoping that they'll improve. And unfortunately, we have what we consider to be a willful violation of the Act in terms of putting an unsafe piece of equipment into operations. Hopefully, this will be a bellwether to prevent further maintenance records from being compromised in the future.
I
you're
told
right.
you about his kind demeanor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so much for that kind of.
We respect your mission, but we hope we can all advance from what we've learned. Hey, I've been on the receiving end.
I can tell. Well, first I'm going to say I'm going to respond to, the company will get a copy of this report that I was talking about the same day the family's going to get it. We're going to turn around a letter within 24 hours because we think your report is missing a lot of information and blames the company unfairly. And so we're going to write you a detailed letter that everyone on this side of the table is going to approve, and then we'll ask that with every copy of the report you distribute, you give a copy of our letter with it, which you will never do. But we'll still ask anyway. And then we'll challenge the citations, or the ones that we decide after we confer. If there is any pending 110C investigation, which is going to be looking into the willful violation that Larry referenced. If we think the agency might be coming out to do a 110C investigation, we might file a notice of contest for that one citation and prepare the people who are blamed, the managers who are blamed in that citation for a 110C investigation, because that could happen. We might even ask Larry if we can expect one, and he may or may not tell me if he's referring it for a 110C. Are you going to tell me, Larry?
Well, I would rather not.
So we're just going to sit on pins and needles until we hear. And really, clients ask all the time, like, when are we going to know? And the answer is just no news is good news.
Yeah.
And that's anything else, Paul, on that?
No, like I mentioned, I knew that typically we'll never walk away from, I mentioned to everybody that we weren't going to walk away unscathed, that they would issue something, whether it's a failure to control the haul truck or whatever, we were going to end up with some type of paperwork. So.
Okay, well, while all of this stuff is going back and forth, from your standpoint, Kyle, your communications here, what are you trying to do?
So I'm gonna bounce around just a little bit and address a couple things, because I thought Matt brought up a couple of really good points. First of all, and the lessons learned kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I think before you go into a situation like this, the training is so critical. These types of events unfortunately happen too often, and not just a desktop drill a year, but once or twice a year, a full-blown crisis plan where you bring together your entire team. You know, you go through a scenario like this, like it's real life and it's happening. That will serve the team really well. I'm going to jump around. We talked about social media again, and I mentioned earlier our the media space is so fragmented, and everybody's a reporter, right? Everybody has a camera and a microphone now. We have a social media policy. I think this is an opportunity to also share that policy again. It's not for me to tell people not to post things, but it's to help guide and direct them on what they should be sharing from a work perspective, I think. So, that's something that we can do from this as well. I think part of our social license to operate kind of requires us to talk about these things. Brian gave a great presentation about CRM earlier. We're all on a zero harm journey. Unfortunately, none of us have achieved that level of perfection yet, unfortunately. At some point, I hope we do, but part of what gives us the ability to continue to operate, I think, is sharing strategically, and of course with your approval, what we can about the lessons learned. And I think the key thing as a follow-up is continue to find those opportunities from a communications perspective and a review perspective. You mentioned a new technology. We have the same thing, SmartCap. Sharing those types of stories, which monitors people's, their sleep deprivation, if you will. Those are great stories to share because it shows the journey of the business. It shows the journey of the industry in terms of how we're becoming more sophisticated all the time. And so I think we have to find those types of stories to share across the board with everybody. And so those are the things I'm going to focus on doing. Obviously, there were some mistakes made here. We're not going to shy away from those from a communications perspective. We're going to address them. but we're just going to continue to do it in a factual way with what we know, when we know it, and then again, try to emphasize the positives that we're getting out of it.
From the communication standpoint, though, we've got a lot of back and forth going between the company and MSHA. How do you handle that?
I think in this situation, our folks that have the relationship with MSHA are going to continue to manage that relationship. What I'm going to do when I'm asking what we're going to communicate is just simply that we're collaborating with regulatory agencies, get our business back up and running, and improve our business. And I think that's kind of what the way I would prefer to position this. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we'll let our environmental manager have the last word here before we turn it over for questions. Kathy, any of your aftermath effects?
Obviously, I didn't do a very good job sharing the emergency response plan that we actually do have in place, or any of our spill reporting forms. So I'm going to do a better job in our annual environmental training and make sure everybody understands that it applies across the board. I'm also going to make sure my team has done a tabletop exercise or two, as well as some of the large-scale crisis things, but an internal, hey, this is something that we have to understand. I fared a lot better with the agency. My environmental agencies are a lot nicer than Larry is. Because I was able to come clean, we shared all the information factually, we reported as soon as we knew. Even though we were late reporting, I did make the notifications as soon as I found out from home. I was still in my bunny slippers and everything. So our fines were much lower. We still did get a fine, but there were mitigating circumstances, and the railroad design was subpar around the river. So we didn't get hit with the large-scale fine, although I think the railroad company was really sorry because they are getting hit with a pretty good-sized fine for not protecting the railroad from the river. So I think in general, training, and more training. And then, working with communications group and legal and the engineering to make sure that all of the controls are in place that need to be, so that everybody's aware of how we're doing our business.
Good. Well, thank you all. We'll open up the floor to questions at this point. I appreciate all of our panelists, including the abuse that some of them took throughout the process. But remember, he's just an actor.
You did a good job, though.
So I'll open things up to the floor. Yes, ma'am.
I have more just a comment. I'm fairly new to mining. I work at Hexagon Mining. We create software and hardware that's implemented in the mines. And I just want to thank you because, of course, I know that the safety solutions we provide are to help prevent occurrences, but this, domino effect of what happened and all of the people involved, this is a revelation for me. And one of the tools that we do have is the fatigue monitoring, and then coupled with vehicle intervention system. It's just fantastic because obviously now there's technology in place to put all of you out of work. So thank you, I found it very insightful.
Any other thoughts, comments, Sharon?
I have a comment. Go ahead.
I was just curious, obviously there's a whole lot of moving parts and you're all going to be off in your own little corners. How often would you see your crisis committee coming back together during the course of the handling of this matter in communicating not as a segment or as a segment, but as a whole group?
At least the first few days constantly until the fire's out, and then it probably lessens, but a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, some people just have an open line that everybody's on.
Our crisis management plan actually refers to a war room where you have a rep of each department who are in that room together at least during the first 24, 48 hours.
Well, I think the question really was, outside of a crisis situation, would you get together to talk about implementation of safety plans of crisis management before the fact?
Is that your question?
It was not, but it's very interesting. The group answered my question, but this question's very interesting too.
That was actually my question, was do you have a crisis management team that practices? You know, you mentioned Kathy, the tabletop. I was thinking that was environmental, but does the crisis management team get together and do mock?
Our crisis management plan actually does have some of those things in it. Because we're not doing anything yet, we haven't done one. So I'll be honest, but I took this scenario directly to my team and said, hey, what would you do? And all of them panicked. And so I realized that my environmental group, even though they're all HAZWOPER trained and they all are supposed to know what to do, needs to have that. So we're going to start doing those just as an internal group without the rest of the crisis management team so that they get comfortable with kind of what's going to be on site, what the response is, how they can manage it. And then at least that way, I know that the people that have to deal with the actual substances are prepared.
Yes, Anthony.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but for your EMS folks or local hospitals kind of involved, how much have you involved them? And I realize you're setting up your crisis management team, but
well, that's a requirement in the one plan that you actually provide MSDSs of all materials to be used on site to the local hospital, to the closest hospital, and that they be notified that you do have reportable quantities and the potential for people to be hurt by those. So we've already done that.
But in terms of an actual multi-casualty event, you know, where you're going to have to be handing people off, perhaps with, either within your mine site or taking them to a spot where they can be transported either by ambulance or helicopter.
Those are all set up well in advance. I know, Paul, when I worked at Gray, we had one already done. We've already have that information at a site that's not even constructed yet. So all of that information is developed early, it's discussed often, and it's the outside prepared with that.
Do they actually drill with you though in those regards?
Sometimes you do. So at Bingham Canyon, well before the main phase, we actually had a large-scale incident test where they even brought a helicopter into the mine site, or into Bingham Canyon, and took somebody out. But what you find is that sometimes you kind of leave a kind of a long period of time before you do that again. And what we saw with the main phase was, we're doing some things again, and you're actually going to do a major test of that once again, an actual test, except for the failure after, so we didn't do that. But it was really important for us to practice that, and even the tabletop exercises which we were doing helped us a lot when we had the actual.
Question over here.
Yeah, my name is Jorge Pazos. I'm with Hadley here today, and my question is for Dennis. The insurance company, right? We had the incident, we have damages, and the insurance company is going to pay at the beginning, right? So my question is about subrogation. Will you give us more details about subrogation? How is the insurance company, after payment of those damages, going to probably recover? Either from the mining company or, I don't know, I mean, are you going to go before the worker, even if he was negligent, he was drunk, whatever, I don't think he has been pockets, right? So could you give us
Absolutely. Usually what happens is that there's a hold harmless agreement. You can't sue yourself, so employees are usually exempt. So there would be no action taken in regards to the driver. What we're really looking for here is a third party that actually was responsible for maintaining the vehicle. And of course, subrogation is only promulgated on indemnity. So you've got the insurance company has to pay before they start this huge witch hunt, which is why it's important to make sure that you prioritise the investigation, declare indemnity, and start payments, whether they're partial or settle the claim, before you start this whole concept of subrogation of the recovery. The other thing is it has to be brought in concert with the insured. The insurance company can't just go out and sue ABC truck manufacturing. And the other thing we have to be very conscious about, there's two things. One is uninsured losses, because obviously the mine in this case has a right of subrogation for all the uninsured losses in addition to the insured losses that the insurer is entitled to recover, and they would be put together in one plan. The second thing is, of course, we have to consider the relationship that they have with ABC Trucking. There may be long-term contracts, long-term relationships, and you may have something that takes place behind the scenes where the trucking company says, look, we're so sorry for this, can we do some sort of arrangement where we do 90 cents in the dollar or something like that, where we'll settle more proactively rather than dragging this through some long, frustrated litigation. And you know, many times that has appeal. And also you've got the long-term relationship that the insured has or the mine has with that trucking company that needs to be considered too. Sometimes that's not important, but when it comes down to Caterpillar or other people or Komatsu that are long-term, not only suppliers but maintenance people for the equipment, that does have an important role to play. I hope that answered it all right.
Here, we'll go up here next.
I just have a couple of comments. You know, we talk about these plans and learning from my past. If you practice, or I'm sorry, you play how you practice. If you don't practice your plans and they sit on the shelf and they collect dust, you don't pull them out, you have old numbers of people that aren't even there anymore. So the more you can, you know, one desktop and one actual full mock with your EMR team and external agencies a year is fantastic, and that would help. Because out of that, you'll find that, going back to what the gentleman over there was saying, you know, when you're doing that and you're calling a helicopter in for your landing zone, do we have the right communication? You know, are we digital and they're VHF or mutual aid? So you'll find out all these different things, like the fire department coming in or the sheriff. Can we communicate with these people? And you learn that from actually, you know, sitting down and talking to those folks.
Good point. Yes.
Just add to that, I think, you know, it's really important when you bring in the outside agencies to participate in the tests or scenarios. It's important to bring them back in for the postmortems, and so you can learn from each other on how to respond better when it really happens. I mean, we hold quarterly ones at Resolution with the local law enforcement and public safety folks, and the evolution they've gone through along with us has been pretty remarkable for a really small, rural, you know, service provider to be able to perform at the level they're performing now versus where they were 5 years ago. It's been pretty remarkable.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
So I just have a comment. I think you kind of already answered the previous questions around. This is just one scenario where this group of people would be called, but there's other scenarios such as bombs, fires, intruders. I can see the same group of people coming into play. The other thing is that when I was listening to the scenario, how it occurred, you know, I'm also trying to, as a safety professional, think about, it's like I'm also trying to figure out how it took place. And it's hard not to think about going back to the thought about a haul truck, and this is with an assumption that it's usually a large haul truck, but it's really small, and a very large haul truck is like mining with a wheelbarrow. You got to use big equipment. Going 45 miles down at 10% rate is extremely dangerous. It has potential, it has a lot of potential that it could happen before, but it hasn't resulted in an accident. It would seem to me like some kind of discovery or some kind of analysis could have been done by now. That's not a good design. And then you rely on the equipment. So the equipment itself, normally these haul trucks don't last. They have a shelf life of about 3 to 5 years. They take a lot of wear and tear. And inside of those newer developments is the new technology, like Paul was talking about, the retarder society. So in this investigation, you know, I would be looking at, okay, the manufacturer, how this was designed, and make sure that it's kept up with these designs. Inside those designs are also trackers. Trackers is GPS, or even data recorders, which would tell you a lot of information on how that equipment was operated. And that should be checked before an accident. That is going to tell you a lot of history that's going on there. And you know, you just try to unfold this puzzle. This is how it happened.
So in our scenario, the 45 miles an hour raised a really big red flag for the right of the spot.
You're looking at about 1 million pounds going downhill. So it's like going 140 miles an hour in your car downhill and making a turn.
Yeah.
No bird's going to stop that.
No.
Further comment? Yes, sir.
I have a question. So after the accident, you come back and it's time to renew your policy. What are some of the what are some of the issues that the insurance company is going to be looking for in renewing that policy or deciding, you know what, I'm walking away?
Clearly, it's going to be that risk engineering that I spoke about and recommendations that may be needed to be adopted in order to make the coverage attractive. As I said, it's all about price, it's all about the wording. It's often that they're not married together, they're inextricably linked sometimes, but certainly risk engineering is going to be an important key in that, and that's where the broker along with the risk manager will have a vital role to make sure that those things are married properly.
So are they inevitably just going to see premium increases and other?
Well, it depends on the program. You can have, this might be subject to 20 insurers because of the size of the risk. I mean, the whole value of the site might be $800 million as the total sum insured. The capacity of one insurer is not going to be sustainable to insure all that. So it may be farmed out to 20 or 15 different insurers, each having an individual share. So you might have some insurers that simply walk away and says, we don't have an appetite for this stuff anymore. Particularly the underwriter just got fired because he underwrote it and their loss ratio went from 90% to 150. These things happen, trust me. So the broker is out there, if you like, to put the program together where you have 100% coverage and also is price commensurate with the risk. And of course the claim would be well known to the market. That's one of just the things that utmost good faith, that when you go through the renewal period, you have to have total and full disclosure of the circumstances of the loss and also the consequences of the loss for people to make evaluations. Not just done from the desk. That's where risk engineers will come in and do an appraisal, and they will be very interested to see all the modifications and safety improvements and things that have changed as a direct consequence of this accident.